Sam Wilson here, Sam's Antique Motors. Today a little departure from the normal metal work and sanding, and I thought I'd do a little bit of content on how to finish bedwood for one of these trucks, at least the way I do it. So stay tuned and I'll tell you what I know. Hey, before we get started today, please take a second to subscribe to the channel, and if you're already subscribed, well, you're freaking awesome. While you're at it, tap the bell, and that way you'll get a notification each time I post one of these exciting videos, and that way you'll never miss a new episode on this or any future builds. Finally, if you like the video or you learned something today, well, give it a thumbs up and drop me a comment in the comment section, because you can imagine how much I like to read all those comments. And your likes and comments really do help me reach a broader audience. So with that, let's get started. Well, most of these trucks, I think all the way up through the early 70s, the bedwood was made out of pine, and it was actually painted black in most cases, which was, I think, a product they used called lamp black, which was more of a dye than a paint. But I find it really hard to put all this time and energy into a truck and then paint bedwood black. So I've not brought myself to doing that. In all the trucks that I've built, which is now 3 of them, I've gone back with an oak bed, new bed wood. And you can pretty much use just about any kind of material you want. There's some materials that are better than others. White oak is got a more open grain. When you look at it, this is red oak, but the little grain lines in between here on red oak are a little tighter than generally what you find on white oak. White oak, however, will not rot. So that's why all the old ships back in the days of Columbus, they built all the frames of big boats and ships out of white oak. So you can use white oak, you can use red oak. Like I say, red oak has a little tighter grain to it. And the truth is, these trucks don't see enough water in conditions that would allow the bed to rot. So you can use the two. I've seen people use walnut, which is a really, really tight grained wood. Works wonderfully, sands wonderfully, looks beautiful. A little expensive, a little pricey. I think I bought all the bed wood for this for about 250 bucks in what they call S2S, which is surfaced 2 sides. That means it's surface top and bottom. The edges are random and the links are random. That's probably the most inexpensive way you can buy it. Unsurfaced, which would even be cheaper, but you got to then surface it. But if you buy it S2S, then you know really what the grain looks like, and you can pick and match to get nice grain products. I think this was, like I say, I think about 250 bucks worth of red oak. Walnut would probably be twice that. I think walnut's probably about $4 a foot today. You could do it out of maple. Maple is a really dense wood, so it doesn't take stain very good. It's going to be a real blonde. But you can buy maple. It's really dense. It's really straight. Almost has no discernible grain. It'll be, very, very blonde yellow. You could do mahogany. Mahogany is technically a hardwood, but it's actually very soft. You can push your fingernail into mahogany. And right behind the camera here is my 1931 Chris Craft, and I did that with white oak on the frames and mahogany on all the planks and top sides. It's absolutely gorgeous, beautiful. It'll stain a little darker brown, and you can put dyes to it to get it almost black if you wanted it that way. And mahogany, I don't know, mahogany's probably about $3 a board foot, so it's probably cheaper than walnut. I even saw a bed one time done out of zebra, and zebra is an exotic wood. I'm guessing that's borderline $10 a foot. Is absolutely gorgeous. It's just got ribbons running through it. The grain is gorgeous grain. It's very difficult to work. It's hard, and the grain on a typical board that's been surfaced 2 sides, in some part of the board the grain will go like this, and then you get to the other part of the board and the grain goes like that. So when you put it through a planer, it wants to chip out when it gets to where the blades are going against the grain on the zebra. So it's really hard to work. You almost have to sand it. You can plane it on one side as long as you didn't mind a few of those little hickeys underneath, but on the top side you'd probably have to plane it down to within about an 1/8 and then use a horizontal sander to sand it to the thickness you want. So like I said, in this case it's a red oak frames. I bought the material for about 250 bucks. I have a full wood shop here with table saws, band saws, routers, planers, joiners. It took me about a half a day to take the S2S boards. By the way, you can buy S4S, which is surfaced 4 sides, and specify the exact width. But in my case, I like to buy them random widths so I can pick and choose the grain and cut them the way I want them. So in this case, I bought the material, I cut it to a rough length, and then I milled all the sides. First I milled the thickness, then I jointed one side to get a nice straight edge. I put it on the table saw, cut it about a 1/16 inch fat, then I ran that edge back through the joiner so all the edges are jointed. Once I did that, then I used a router table. Actually, I used a dado blade, not a router table, so I used my dado blade set with about a 1/4 inch buildup of the dado blades, and I ran the deep groove boards right here. So you can probably see this. So this is the deep groove. So I set up with a 1/4 inch blade and I pushed it through to cut this blade. Then I put about a 3/4 inch stack of dado knives and I cut this piece. And there's great information. I'll attach it to this video, but I can't remember who produces it. It'll be on the document, but it's a nice document that really gives all the bed woods, all the sizes, all these dimensions, which are quite simple. This is merely a 1/4 inch cut, 3/4 over. That leaves a 1/2 inch here, and this is a 1/8 inch down, and this actually I think is about 3/16, but I set that to the thickness of the metal bed strips. So I cut those, and then if you're going to see the fasteners, I got a Forstner bit and I measured off where these holes are on the bed, and I took a 1 9/16 inch Forstner bit and cut this so that it recesses the washer down in the hole, and then you have to offset that 3/16 of an inch from the center of the bolt hole, which makes it an offset washer to be able to tighten these up and hold their place. So I cut all those. I got all that done. Yesterday I came in here and I finished sanded all of it. So I used a belt sander with a fine paper. I think it's about 180, and I sanded all these boards top and bottom. When you run a board through a planer, you get just a little bit of a variation unless the knives are just absolutely perfect, which mine are supposed to be, but it still gets just a little bit of a waffle. So I took that sander and I cut all of that off, all these boards top and bottom, and then I came back with some kind of 200 and just hand sanded over the top of that to just make sure there's no burrs. It took me about a half a day to sand these 8 boards. There's 2 boards that are, I think, 4 inches. There's 2 boards that are 5 1/4. There's 2 boards or 4 boards that are 7 1/4. So I sanded all those down, and then what I like to use is I coat them with, this is a product made by Smith's. I'll put this in the link as well. This is Smith's Clear Penetrating Epoxy, and this is a 2-part mixture. It's kind of expensive. I think this was about $100 for 2. I think those are 2 quarts. But I had plenty to do with 2 quarts. I had plenty to do this. I still have probably a 1/4 left in each can. But that clear penetrating epoxy, it's a real thin. It's almost like water. And you don't paint it like varnish. You spread it on and you let it soak into the wood. And when you do that, it penetrates deep into this oak, and it basically just locks it all up. And what that helps it do is stop these boards from moving. You know, all boards have what's called ligness inside the molecular structure of the cells, and that ligness those molecules move. So depending on temperature and humidity, they expand, and that's why boards move. They move more in a width direction than they do a length direction, but they move. And so that brings about a real problem with people trying to paint bedwood. I don't really care what kind of paint you put on a bed, it is not going to stick. I mean, once you get to UV rays and you move it and you wash the car and you get it in the rain and you dry it off and the temperature changes, those boards are going to move. And if you put any kind of paint that by nature will eventually harden, when those boards move, it's going to at some point start flaking off of there. So it's just, I frankly don't think it's possible to paint bedwood and have it stick. Now, if you put clear penetrating epoxy sealer on it, that tends to lock up those boards and it gives a really good binding surface. I like just the natural look of it. You can stain underneath this. They say you can even stain over the top of it. I'm not sure how that works because the boards aren't going to soak up the stain as well, but you can do both. So these are just natural looking boards. They'll get a little darker when I varnish them, but basically I put that clear penetrating epoxy on there and I'm gonna let that dry here for 2 or 3 days. It's a little cooler now. So I'm gonna really let all the solvents evaporate out of that epoxy and seal up those boards. And I saw a guy posted some bed work the other day, and you could see on the ends he didn't have the sealer down on the ends. So it's really important when you do that, get the sealer down here in these ends of these boards, because this is really where the water's going to wick in. I didn't want to say anything to the guy, but if you don't seal up those ends, it's going to wick water and make those boards expand. So you really got to get good coverage on all of that. So now that I've got that done, the next step is I'm going to come back. So now that I've got that done, the next step is I'm going to come back and I'm going to lightly sand this. I don't want to sand it too much because I don't want to start cutting into the epoxy sealer, but I'm just going to knock off any burrs. This is actually pretty smooth the way it is, but the best way to get it really smooth from the get-go is when you get it all sanded, get it ready to put on it, then soak it with a water hose and then let that just air dry. I mean, you don't have to put it in a tub of water, but just take a water hose and spray it on it and wet the board. And when you wet that board, when it dries, that raises the grain. So if you'll raise the grain and then sand it again, then you'll have when you start putting finishes on it, the grain will not rise and cause a roughness. So in this case, these are done that way. They're pretty smooth. So once this dries, then I'm going to come back and I'm going to put some varnish on it. And what I've been using is, this just happens to be Old Masters Spar Marine Varnish. It's exterior, oil base. This is true varnish. I mean, I've got about a half a gallon left. I've done 3 beds with it. So you just want to get some really good varnish. And the best place to source that is out of a marine store. Interlux makes some very good varnishes. Epithane makes some good varnishes. Pettits makes some good varnishes. So these are all varnishes that I've used on the boat. In this case, this is just, basic spar varnish. And when you put the varnish on, you really want to use a badger hair brush. So this is a badger hair brush. It's kind of stiff now, but it'll soften up. Badger hair brushes are a little expensive, but you don't want to use something like a latex brush or plastic brush or nylon brush. Go get a natural hair, either a China bristle brush, or in this case a badger hair brush. And a couple of things when you're varnishing is that you really don't want to stir the varnish. You can stir it a little bit if it's been sitting for a long time, but stir it, but then let it sit for a day and come back to it. Because when you stir varnish, you introduce air bubbles down into the varnish, and those bubbles will translate onto your work. So you want to get the varnish and you want to just lay it on in nice smooth strokes, kind of crisscross, get it all in there, and then tip it all off in one direction. When I say tip it off, once you get it all kind of worked into the grain really good, then come back and just barely tip it, and that'll smooth it out. And if you do that, what I do is I put about 3 coats on it. I have a saying that anytime someone tells me how to do something, you know, I usually ask them, I say, well, have you ever done that before? And if they say no, but a friend of mine has, well, then I know they're just full of shit. So generally I try to find people that have done it themselves. And in working on that Chris Craft boat, I spent a lot of time trying to learn how to varnish, because that's got about 25 coats of varnish on it. And a lot of people will tell you to put the varnish on and then sand it back flat, and then put another coat of varnish on and sand it flat. But that's not what you want to do, because when you put down varnish, as the solvents evaporate out of the varnish and it dries, the UV protection rises to the top. So if you varnish and then you go in there and you sand that off, you're cutting all the UV protection out of the varnish. And then you put another coat of varnish down and you sand that one off, you basically have no UV protection in the coat, finished coat. So what you really want to do is lay up about 3 nice, good, flowing, smooth coats of varnish, and then come back in with probably some 220 sandpaper. And you can, this is one case where you can hand sand it. You don't necessarily have to use a block, but you can use a block if you want, but just go in there and just sand that until it is all smooth, just like sanding primer on a body panel. You want to cut all the little shiny spots off till it's all dull. And once you get that done, then I come back on with 3 more coats. And when I get that done, then I come in and I sand that smooth. It'll be a little less effort, and you can probably do that with 320. So you get a little finer grade of sandpaper. And then when I get 6 coats on there, sanded twice, it'll be effectively really flat. And if you will get a product called Penetrol, and I'll show you that, I'll put that in the list as well, and you mix a little bit of Penetrol into this varnish and then lay down your last coat. When you lay that coat down, it'll have brush strokes in it and it'll look like it was brushed, but when you come back the next day, that will just have laid down like glass. It'll look like you took it out of a spray gun if you do it right. So that's the process I'm going to do on this bedwood. And like I said, I'm going to wait another day or 2 to get this solvents evaporated out of this penetrating epoxy, and then I'm going to go to town. So stay tuned. Well, I've had a couple of days to let this epoxy sealer dry out and all the solvents evaporate. So I'm going to go ahead and put a first coat of varnish on here today, and we'll see how this goes on. I did want to point out that the way I did that is I take these boards and I cut an angle at them so there's just a point that this sits on, and when I varnish them, I do the bottom side first and then flip them over, and I line them up where the hole is, because this is what would sit on that sill, and you won't see it if there's any line from varnishing it. So that's the plan. This first coat goes on kind of rough because it soaks in, and I'm not too worried about it. I'm really worried more about just getting a good coverage on it. On this coat, I actually take the brush and go across grain, and that helps to work it down into the grain. And I always pour my paint into a bucket. At least that's the way my father told me to do it. And it keeps contaminants out of your paint. You can actually hear it and you can feel it. We'll be sure and get varnish on the ends. You can hear it, and when you get it good coverage where it's all varnished up, it gets quieter, and you can tell that you've got it good coverage. Okay, there you have it. And if you buy the right varnish, when you get done, you have exactly enough to cover the boards. So that's important. It's kind of like buying No More Run clear, or at least straining the runs out of the clear before you paint it. If you get it exactly right, then that's what you have. So I got all these boards varnished, and you notice this hole is right on this rim, so this bar will be right where that sill plate is. And again, I cut this at an angle so that there's just a knife edge actually touching the board. So I'll let this dry, and it's actually going to wind up drying in about 3 days because I'm fixing to go out of town, but it'll get nice and hard, and then I'll come back and put another one on, and then another one on, and it'll be time to then sand it back down smooth. And I'm not too worried. I try to get the runs out, you know, make nice smooth brush marks, but I'm not too worried about, you know, little pieces of trash or hairs or debris in it this time, because I'm going to wind up sanding most of that out. So, so it's all good. Stay tuned. Okay, this was step 2. I just finished laying down a second kind of heavy coat of varnish here using my badger hair brush, and I went ahead and bought that exact proportion varnish that's available, so I got the exact amount that I needed to finish that coat. It did take kind of exactly 1 quart to do both sides of this, and now I'll go clean my brush back out and wait for these solvents to evaporate, and then I'll put the third coat on there. In the oh by the way category, don't even think about trying to do this with a roller. A bunch of people always talking about using foam rollers and roll it on first and tip it off later. Bullshit. Get you a good China bristle, preferably a badger hair bristle brush, just like this. This one's 2.5 inches wide. Had this for 15 years. Get you a good badger hair brush, brush it on. Don't even think about it. Not only is it not a very good way to do it, it's just sacrilegious to use a fucking foam roller for just about anything. So that's my tip of the day. Okay, I'm about to lay down a third coat of this varnish on here, and it pretty often happens that, you know, if you put it on pretty heavy like I've been doing, I always paint the underside first, then flip it over and paint the top side, and inevitably some varnish will drip down through these holes or down the edges and just cause a drip or a run. So unlike bodywork paint, it's pretty easy to just scrape that off. I don't try to sand it because it's going to be soft, but if you just take a scraper, this is a set of scrapers I've had for about 20 years, and you can actually sand wood a lot of times better and flatter with a scraper than with sandpaper. But, you know, at the end of the second step, I'm going to just scrape that off. And it just cuts any dribble right off the surface, no problem. So I don't worry too much about, you know, a drip or a run at this stage of the game because it's coming on the underside. I knock it off. Now it's all smooth, and I'm going to put a third coat on there. And also in the oh by the way category, with varnish, it's best to use turpentine to clean the brush. So I don't actually clean the brush every time. So when I'm in the middle of varnishing, when I get done, I just come in
and wring all the varnish out of the brush. And then I just set it in the brush with turpentine up to the top of the brush, and I just keep it overnight. I take another one of these buckets and just put on the top of it. So if I got my brush in here, I just take this and set it over the top of it. They actually make brush holders that you store varnish and seals them up. For a lot of times people just keep them in varnish all the time, but while you're working, you don't have to really clean the brush every time. Just get the big stuff out and then dry it out when you get ready to use it. And then what I do is take an air nozzle and just blow all around it until I don't get any more air coming out, and now it's nice and dry and ready to go again. So at this stage, I'm going to lay down a third coat, and then we'll be ready to see about doing some sanding. But this is already just really smooth. I mean, you can't really see it in the video, but there's almost no brush marks, and so it's going to come out really nice. I'll put another coat on it. I'll sand it flat, just like automotive paint, where you don't see any shiny spots. Then I'll put another couple of coats, the last coat with Penetrol. This is the Penetrol, buy it at any hardware store. I'll put a little of that in there per the instructions, and it'll flow out like glass. So, okay, so I'm gonna put third coat on. Here we go. So I got my third coat on. Just gonna show you that, I just took this brush, I wrung it out really good, and then I just filled it up with turpentine right to the edge of the bristles. And then I just put another cup on the top of that just to kind of keep the air out of it. And then when I come back to put the next coat, it'll be fine. I'll dry it out, blow it out, be ready to go.
Well, I'm here today listening to little ZZ Top LaGrange while I'm in LaGrange, Texas. And I've now got 3 coats of varnish on here. And what I'm doing now is just scraping this down. You can sand it down, but what I use is a scraper initially. And I've had this scraper set for probably 20 years. Periodically you have to resharpen it, like I resharpened it today for the first time. And what I use this for is to just scrape off the upper coating. I mean, this cuts it down quickly and fastly and flat. So this is really flat here. File it with a file, always on the flat side, the whole side of the file. And what I'm trying to do here is just knock all the varnish off the top to get down to where there's no shiny spots. Kind of like sanding primer on a body panel. So I'm not really too worried about taking too much off, but I just want to come in here and scrape the top so it's less to be sanded. So you can see how much this is taken off. And I'm just trying to get it to where you get as close as you can down to no shiny spots. And I'm just holding this at a slight angle so it's picking up this nice sharp edge. And I know you can't really see this board. I don't know if this will give you any shiny spots or not, but this is taking off, getting down to where it's mainly got all the high spots off. And then I'm gonna come back with a sander and do the rest. Alright, let's see what time it is. 1 o'clock. So it's taken me about an hour to do 4 of these. So that's 15 minutes a board, not too bad if you do it this way. You can see I'm fighting this bullshit piece of PVC hose. I hate these fucking things. So I'm probably gonna throw this one away because I'm tired of fighting it. But it's a little bit chilly, and so it's just stiff as a board. So don't buy PVC hoses. So okay, I'm gonna move to the next one. Stay tuned. Okay, I now have 4 coats. I put 3 down, sanded it flat, put another coat on it, and this time I sanded it with 320. So I got just a 320 sanding pad, knocked all the tops off of it. Now this is getting to be pretty flat. So I've wiped it down. It's when you start getting, and I moved it into my paint room where I don't have as much dust. And when you get at this stage, you really want to get all the dust off of it in between coats, because the brush will pick up, you know, all the little dust that's in the grain and then put that back in the varnish. So I've wiped it down with acetone after sanding with 320. And now I'm just doing one side at a time so that I'm not getting, you know, varnish on the underside. So I'm gonna go ahead and finish the tops of these, put another coat, and this time I think I'm gonna put a little bit of penetrol in it to see if it'll lay down a little flatter. I'll probably sand that one more time with 320 or 400, and then I'll probably put one more coat, which will give me 6 coats. And then I'll flip it over and do the bottom side, and we'll be done. So from here, I'm gonna mix up a little penetrol and go ahead and lay some paint on it. Okay, there you have it, coat 6. This is really starting to lay down nicely. Smoothing out a few places, make sure there's no places I missed. So I think in the morning when I come back in, this should be looking really nice. And I'll probably sand it and put one more coat, which would be a 6th coat. That'd be a 7th coat, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4. That'd be a 6th coat. So, and I'm not cleaning my brush every time. I'm just wiping it out and putting it back in turpentine. So when I get ready to do that last coat, I'll probably really clean the brush good and get a good fresh cup of varnish. That used, let's see, 60, that used 8 ounces. So you can tell it was taking 32 ounces to cover both sides of the boards before. Now it's taking effectively 16, so it's taking half as much varnish because it's not soaking into the wood, it's just building coats at this point. So Shackleton, no, we don't eat the braces. No brace eating. No, negative. Let's go home. Let's go get a cocktail. Okay, I mixed some penetrol, 1 to 8. So for 16 ounces, I put in about 2 ounces of penetrol, and now I'm just gonna do these boards here. I'm gonna stack up where I can reach them, and I'm just doing the tops on this. And when you do this part, you kind of got to be a little more gentler than what I did with the other ones, because you don't want to introduce a whole bunch of bubbles and you just kind of want to take nice, easy strokes. And you're really not filling the grain, you're really just putting a top coat on it. And when I get to the ends, I generally kind of paint away from the ends so I don't drag it off the brush and put a big run down the end of the board. And once I get it all kind of coated, then I come back and I just tip it off, so I'm just not putting much brush pressure at all. I'm just letting the varnish kind of flow out. And that tips it off and gets some of the bubbles out. What do you think, Shackleton? Is this going on pretty smooth? Yeah, I thought you'd like it. You can send any comments to Shackleton the Shop Dog. I'm going to attempt to take this camera and show you how this is laying out. I'm not sure if I can get the glare working or not, but I'm going to try it. So you can see on this board, this is the one I just painted, and see all the little air bubbles that are in there? I think you can see those. That's just from the brush, and some of that is just dust, but you can see how that has got all these bubbles in it. And then you can see this is starting to flow out. So now you don't have any of those air bubbles, and this is starting to get really, really flat. So after that sits there for a little bit, that penetrol just really helps it to start laying down. Again, you can see the first board I painted is here. I don't know if you can see it in this, but that one's flatter. This one is getting flat. This still has bubbles. This still has bubbles. So when you put that penetrol on there, it really does a great job of letting that stuff flow out. Well, welcome back to Resto-Rat Bed Finishing School. I have now got 6 good solid coats. I sanded it down flat after 3. I sanded it down flat after the next 3, so these boards are now nice and flat. There's very few, if any, little shiny spots sitting on them, so I've got all the grain filled up, and I sanded all that with 320. I sanded it with the grain, got it all smoothed out. I've wiped it all down and blown it as clean as I can get it with air and acetone. I got me a fresh badger hair brush and fresh varnish I did about 2 ounces of penetrol to 8 ounces of varnish to see if I can get this to lay down and flow out. And at this stage of the game, I'm hoping that I can make one more coat of this, lay down and be a nice satin finish and be finished. So I'm gonna just try to lay this on. I've got the room sort of heated up. Had a little trouble with getting it warm enough. When it's not warm enough, then it wants to stay glossy. So I'm trying to get this with a nice satin finish. So I'm hoping that I've got the room warm enough, and I've blown it all nice and clean. So hopefully this gets us to the finish line. And when I put the kind of finish coat on, I generally kind of like to just spread it on in more or less one direction. Got to kind of watch around these recesses, and I'm just kind of watching in the reflection to make sure I get good coverage, and try to just brush in one direction. And that's how we do it. So we'll get this all put on, and we'll see what this looks like. Hopefully it'll be warm enough here, and it'll stay on here, and overnight it'll just flow out and just be as flat as it can be. Look like base coat, clear coat on a car. So we'll see how I do. 8 ounces. I got it all laid down. If you can tell in the sort of fast forward, I only kind of did it in one stroke, and then I came back, got it all nice and covered, and then I just came back and tipped it off again with one long smooth stroke, so I don't have stops and starts. And it already looks like it's flowing out nicely. You know, whenever you brush back and forth, you interject little air bubbles in it, and then those air bubbles have to flow out. So, you know, I was trying to keep the air bubbles down to a minimum and just get nice even strokes on it. And I think it's gonna look good. So we'll see how it does. Still got a little heat. It's about 70 degrees, but I got a little heat to just try to get it warmed up. This varnish works a little better when it's warmer. So hopefully that this will do it. We'll see what it looks like after this dries. I will clean up my brush. Well, and here's the finished product. As I was hoping and suspected, with that little Penetrol flow control, it really made this lay down nicely. So I think you can see just the sheen. There's no wrinkles. It's flat as a pancake, and came out really, really nice. So it's a lot of work to do it this way, but this should give you the most durable finish on the boards, and looks gorgeous. So hope this is helpful. Have a nice day, and stay tuned for the next segment. Well, by way of epilogue, I couldn't stand it. So I had to go ahead and put the bed tailgate on, got it all snugged up. The white lettering looks great. Can't feel any paint lines on it. And this bed just turned out really nice once I got all the wood put in. There's no brush strokes, flat as it can be, nice satin finish. If you're wondering what these hooks are for, this is temporary hooks to lift the bed up and set it on the chassis. Got one in each corner here. But those will pull out once I set it down on the chassis. And turned out really nice. If you take the time to kind of put all the steps into it, it's well worth the effort. Stay tuned, and if you got something out of this, sorry about the long video, but be sure and like it and subscribe. And if you got any comments, be sure and send them in. I'll have Shackleton respond.
Download the Resto-Rat app today to begin managing, tracking, and documenting your restoration project.